The smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air as Mia Chen tied her apron strings for another morning shift at Murphy's Diner. 3 years she had been walking through those glass doors, and 3 years she had been greeting the same faces that showed up like clockwork every single day. The truckers heading out on long hauls, the construction workers grabbing breakfast before their early shifts, and the office workers who couldn't start their day without Murphy's famous pancakes. But if there was one customer who could make even the toughest Monday morning feel a little brighter, it was Frank Kowalski. Every Tuesday and Friday, like he had some invisible alarm clock in his head, Frank would push through those doors at exactly 8:30 in the morning. And right beside him, moving a little slower these days but still proud as ever, was his German Shepherd. Rex. Mia remembered the first time she saw them. She was still new then, nervous about getting orders right and worried about spilling coffee on customers. Frank had walked in wearing his old police jacket, the kind that had seen better days but still carried stories in every worn thread. Rex had followed quietly behind, his dark eyes scanning the room the way trained dogs do even in retirement. The other waitresses had whispered among themselves. Some customers didn't like dogs in restaurants, even service dogs. There had been complaints before. But something about Frank was different. He wasn't looking for trouble or trying to make a point. He just wanted a quiet place to sit with his old partner and remember better days. That first morning, Mia had approached their table with shaking hands. Frank had looked up at her with kind eyes, the sort that had probably seen too much during his years on the force but somehow still held warmth for strangers. "Just black coffee for me, sweetheart," he had said in a voice roughened by years of commanding respect on the streets. "And maybe a small bowl of water for my friend here, if you don't mind." Rex had looked up at her then, and Mia swore she saw something almost human in those intelligent brown eyes. This wasn't just any dog. This was a partner, a friend, a family member who happened to have 4 legs instead of 2. From that day forward, Frank and Rex became part of Mia's routine. She learned that Frank liked his toast just barely golden, not too dark. She discovered that Rex had a favorite spot by the window where he could watch the street while staying out of everyone's way. She found out that Frank had been a K-9 officer for 15 years before retiring, and that Rex had been his partner for almost all of that time. The stories Frank told weren't like the action movies people see on television. They were real stories about real work, like the time Rex had found a missing 5-year-old girl who had wandered away from a playground. The little girl had fallen asleep under a bridge, scared and cold. But Rex had tracked her scent for 3 miles through the city. When they found her, she wasn't crying anymore. She was curled up next to Rex, who had somehow known to stay with her until help arrived. Or there was the story about the drug bust downtown, where Rex had sniffed out $30,000 worth of illegal substances hidden inside the walls of an old warehouse. Frank always laughed when he told that one, because the criminals had thought they were so clever hiding everything behind false panels. But Rex had known immediately. "Dogs don't lie," Frank would say. "They can't pretend something isn't there when their nose tells them it is." The other staff at Murphy's didn't always appreciate Frank's stories. Tommy, the manager, would roll his eyes when Frank started talking about the old days. Linda, who worked the afternoon shift, once complained that Frank took up space too long with just 1 cup of coffee, but Mia genuinely looked forward to those conversations. There was something peaceful about listening to Frank talk while Rex lay quietly beside the booth, his gray muzzle resting on his front paws. Rex was getting older, that much was obvious. His steps were slower than they probably used to be, and sometimes Mia noticed him struggling to get up from his favorite spot by the window. But his eyes were still alert, still watching, still protecting Frank the way he had been trained to do all those years ago. Frank was getting older too. Mia had noticed his hands shaking slightly when he lifted his coffee cup, and sometimes he would pause in the middle of a story, looking confused for just a moment before continuing. But he never missed a Tuesday or Friday. Rain or shine, snow or heat, Frank and Rex would be there at 8:30, claiming their corner booth like it was reserved just for them. The other customers had gotten used to them by now. Most people barely noticed Rex anymore, which was exactly how a good service dog should be. He never begged for food, never bothered other diners, never caused any problems. He was just there, a quiet presence that somehow made the whole diner feel a little more like home. Mia had grown protective of them both. When new customers would stare or whisper questions about why a dog was allowed in the restaurant, she would politely explain that Rex was a service animal and had every right to be there. Most people accepted that explanation without any further questions. After all, it was easy to see that Rex wasn't just a pet. Everything about him, from the way he carried himself to the way he stayed focused on Frank, showed that he was working. On quiet mornings, when the breakfast rush had ended and the lunch crowd hadn't arrived yet, Frank would sometimes talk about what it was like to retire after so many years of police work. The hardest part, he told Mia, wasn't giving up the badge or the authority. It was saying goodbye to Rex's working days. "This dog saved my life more times than I can count," Frank would say, reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ears. "Now I'm trying to figure out how to save his. How do you explain retirement to a dog who was born to work?" But watching them together, Mia thought Frank was doing just fine. Rex might not be chasing criminals or searching for evidence anymore, but he was still taking care of his partner. And Frank was taking care of Rex right back. They had found a new purpose together, even if it was just sharing coffee and toast. On Tuesday and Friday mornings at a small diner where a young waitress had learned to appreciate the quiet heroism of everyday people, it was a Tuesday morning like any other, when everything changed at Murphy's Diner. Mia was refilling the coffee station when she heard the familiar chime of the front door at exactly 8:30. Without even looking, she knew it was Frank and Rex arriving for their usual breakfast. She grabbed the coffee pot and headed toward their corner booth, already mentally preparing Frank's black coffee and thinking about whether they had any of those blueberry muffins he sometimes liked. But as she approached their table, she noticed something different in the air. There was a tension that hadn't been there before, a feeling that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Frank was settling into his usual seat, and Rex was taking his customary position by the window, but both of them seemed more alert than usual. The source of the tension became clear when Mia noticed the man sitting 3 tables away. He was someone she had never seen before, probably in his early 50s, wearing an expensive-looking gray suit that screamed money and authority. His tie was perfectly straight, his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he was speaking loudly into his phone about some business deal involving millions of dollars. At first, Mia didn't think much of it. Murphy's got all types of customers, from construction workers covered in dust to businessmen in suits. But as she poured Frank's coffee and listened to him order his usual wheat toast, she became aware that the man in the suit kept glancing over at their table with an expression she didn't like. The man finished his phone call and immediately raised his hand to get Tommy's attention. Tommy, the diner's manager, hurried over with the eager expression he always wore when he thought he was dealing with a big spender. "Excuse me," the man said in a voice that carried across the entire restaurant, "but I need to address a serious health code violation happening right here in your establishment." Every conversation in the diner stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee cups stayed suspended in midair. Even the cook in the back seemed to sense something was happening, because the sizzling sound from the grill got quieter. Mia felt her stomach drop as the man pointed directly at Frank and Rex's table. "That animal should not be in here," the man continued, his voice getting louder with each word. "I don't care what kind of dog it is. This is a place where people eat food. Having a dirty animal in here is disgusting and probably illegal." Frank's face went pale, but his voice remained calm and steady when he responded. "Sir, Rex here is a registered service animal. He's been properly trained and certified, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, he has every right to be here with me." The man in the suit scoffed. "I don't care what papers you have, old man. I'm trying to enjoy my breakfast, and I shouldn't have to look at some mangy dog while I'm eating. It's unsanitary." Mia felt anger bubbling up in her chest. Rex wasn't bangy. His coat might be a little grayer than it used to be, and he might move a little slower, but Frank took excellent care of him. Rex was cleaner than some of the customers who came into the diner, and he certainly had better manners than the man in the expensive suit. Frank tried again, his voice still patient but with an edge that Mia had never heard before. "Rex is a retired police dog, sir. He..." Served this community for 15 years, helping to keep people safe. He's trained to behave appropriately in public spaces, and he's never caused any problems here. I don't care if he used to be a police dog or the president's dog, the man snapped back. Dogs don't belong in restaurants, period. And if the management here can't see that, maybe I need to make some phone calls to the health department. That's when Tommy started to panic. Mia could see it in his eyes, the way they darted between the angry customer and Frank's table. Tommy had always been more concerned about keeping customers happy than doing what was right, and the threat of health department trouble clearly terrified him. Now let's all just calm down, Tommy said, his voice shaky. I'm sure we can work something out here that makes everyone happy. But Mia could see which way this was heading, and she couldn't stay quiet any longer. Excuse me, she said, stepping forward with the coffee pot still in her hand. I think there might be some confusion here about the law. The man in the suit turned his attention to her, and she immediately understood why Frank's voice had gotten that edge. There was something cruel in this man's eyes, something that enjoyed making other people uncomfortable. I don't need a waitress to explain the law to me, sweetheart, he said in a tone that made Mia's skin crawl. I need the management to remove that animal from the premises immediately. Rex isn't just an animal, Mia replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. He's a service dog, and under federal law, he's allowed to accompany his handler anywhere the public is allowed to go. That includes restaurants. The man's face started turning red. Are you seriously going to argue with me about this? I'm a paying customer, and I have rights too. I have the right to eat in a clean environment, without having to worry about dog hair in my food. Frank tried to stand up, probably to leave and avoid any more trouble, but Mia held up her hand. Sir, Rex has never caused any problems in this restaurant, she continued. He doesn't beg, he doesn't bark, he doesn't bother other customers. He just lies quietly next to his owner, exactly like he's supposed to do. And his owner is a retired police officer who served this community for years. I don't care if he's a retired anything, the man shouted, loud enough that people outside could probably hear him. I want that dog gone, or I'm leaving and taking my business elsewhere. And I'll make sure everyone knows that this place doesn't care about basic hygiene. Tommy's face went even paler. Maybe we could work something out, he said, looking at Frank with apologetic eyes. Maybe Rex could wait outside just this once. Mia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tommy was actually considering asking Frank to leave because one rude customer was making a scene. Tommy, she said, you can't. Ask them to leave. It's against the law to discriminate against someone because they have a service dog. But the man in the suit wasn't finished. He stood up from his table, pulling out his phone. That's it. I'm calling the health department right now, and then I'm posting reviews on every website I can find, letting people know that Murphy's Diner allows dirty animals around food. We'll see how much business you have after that. The threat hit Tommy like a punch to the stomach. In today's world, bad online reviews could destroy a small business like Murphy's Diner. One angry customer with a smartphone could undo years of hard work. Please, Tommy said, turning back to Frank. Maybe just for today. Just until we get this sorted out. That's when Mia realized that Tommy was actually going to ask Frank and Rex to leave. After 3 years of being regular customers after never causing a single problem, Frank and Rex were about to be thrown out because one entitled man couldn't stand the sight of an old dog who had spent his life serving others. And that's when Mia made the decision that would change everything. The moment hung in the air like smoke. Mia could feel everyone in the diner watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Tommy was looking at Frank with those apologetic eyes, practically begging him to just leave quietly and avoid any more trouble. The man in the expensive suit was standing with his phone in his hand, ready to destroy the diner's reputation with angry reviews and health department complaints. And Frank was sitting there looking older and more tired than Mia had ever seen him, probably wondering if it was worth fighting for his right to exist in a world that didn't seem to want him anymore. That's when something inside Mia snapped. No, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Absolutely not. Tommy turned to look at her with confused eyes. Mia, please. Let's just what? Mia interrupted, setting the coffee pot down on the nearest table with more force than necessary. Let's just throw out a man who has been coming here twice a week for 3 years? Let's just discriminate against a retired police officer because some guy in a fancy suit doesn't like dogs? The businessman's face went from red to purple. You need to watch your tone, little girl. I'm trying to run a business meeting here and I don't need attitude from the help. The help? Mia repeated, feeling her anger rise another notch. Sir, I've been working in this diner for 3 years and I've never seen you before today. Frank here. He's been a loyal customer longer than I've had this job. Rex there. He spent 15 years keeping this community safe. And you want us to kick them out because you're uncomfortable? Tommy grabbed Mia's arm. Mia, stop, you're making this worse. But Mia shook him off. She looked around the diner at all the faces watching this drama unfold. Mrs. Patterson, who came in every morning for her oatmeal and tea. Joe, the construction worker, who always left a $5 tip even though his breakfast only cost $6. Lisa from the bank, who rushed in during her lunch break for Murphy's famous apple pie. These were good people. Regular people. People who understood that sometimes you had to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. You know what? Mia said, looking directly at the businessman. You're absolutely right about one thing. You do have rights as a customer. You have the right to eat your breakfast and leave. You have the right to pay your bill and go about your day. But you don't have the right to harass other customers. And you definitely don't have the right to force a disabled veteran and his service dog to leave just because you don't like looking at them. Frank tried to stand up again. Mia, it's okay. We can go. I don't want you getting in trouble because of us. Sit down, Frank. Mia said gently but firmly. You're not going anywhere. This is America, and you have rights too. She turned back to the businessman, who was now filming everything with his phone, probably planning to post it online later. And you, she continued, pointing at the camera, can film all you want. Film yourself bullying an old man and his dog. Film yourself trying to deny someone their civil rights. I'm sure that'll look great online. The man lowered his phone suddenly, looking less confident. Do you have any idea what this man has done for people like you? Mia asked. Frank was a police officer for 30 years. Rex was trained to find missing children, to locate drugs that destroy communities, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. They've saved lives, real lives. And this is how you want to treat them? Tommy was pulling at her arm again, harder this time. Mia, that's enough. Stop talking right now. But Mia was past the point of stopping. 3 years of watching people treat service workers like they were invisible. 3 years of seeing customers be rude to elderly people, to anyone they thought was beneath them. 3 years of biting her tongue and smiling while people acted like their money gave them the right to treat others like garbage. No, Tommy, it's not enough, she said. This man thinks his business is more important than basic human decency. He thinks his comfort matters more than federal law. Well, here's a news flash. It doesn't. The businessman was looking around, the diner now, probably realizing that no one was supporting him. The other customers were staring at him with expressions that ranged from disgust to outright hostility. Mrs. Patterson was shaking her head. Joe looked like he wanted to say something, himself. This is ridiculous, the man finally said. I'm not paying for this meal and I'm never coming back here. Good, Mia replied without hesitation. Don't let the door hit you on your way out. The man threw his napkin on the table, grabbed his briefcase, and stormed toward the exit. But before he reached the door, he turned back one more time. You people have no idea how to run a business, he shouted. I'm going to make sure everyone knows about this place. You'll be lucky if you're still open next month. The door slammed behind him so hard that the little bell above it kept ringing for several seconds. The diner was completely silent. Mia could hear her own heartbeat, could feel sweat on her palms even though her hands were shaking. She looked around at all the faces staring at her, trying to figure out if she had done the right thing or just made everything worse. That's when Tommy's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Mia. Office. Now. Her stomach dropped. She could see it in his eyes, could hear it in his voice. She was in trouble. Big trouble. She followed Tommy to the small office behind the kitchen, her legs feeling wobbly. Through the serving window, she could see Frank sitting at his table, Rex beside him, both of them looking worried. Tommy closed the office door and turned to face her. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "What were you thinking?" he asked. "What were you possibly thinking?" "I was thinking about doing the right thing," Mia replied, though her voice wasn't as strong as it had been out in the dining room. "The right thing?" Tommy repeated. "The right thing would have been letting me handle the situation. The right thing would have been keeping your mouth shut and letting me figure out a compromise." "A compromise?" Mia couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Tommy, there was no compromise. That man wanted Frank and Rex to leave, and that's illegal. It's discrimination." "It's business," Tommy shouted. "And now, thanks to your little speech out there, we're going to lose business. That man wasn't bluffing about the reviews, Mia. He's going to destroy us online. He's probably calling the health department right now." Mia felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "So you're saying I should have let him bully Frank?" "I'm saying you should have let me do my job," Tommy replied. "I'm the manager here, not you. And managers sometimes have to make hard choices." They stared at each other for a long moment. Mia could hear the normal sounds of the diner starting up again through the thin office walls. Conversations resuming, silverware clinking against plates, the coffee machine hissing. "Mia," Tommy said finally, his voice quieter now but somehow worse. "I can't have employees who argue with customers. I can't have staff who create scenes and drive away business. I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You're firing me?" "Effective immediately," Tommy said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll have your final paycheck ready by the end of the week." Mia stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. She had stood up for what was right, had defended a good man and his loyal dog, and now she was losing her job because of it. "Fine," she said finally, reaching behind her back to untie her apron. "But Tommy, when you go to sleep tonight, remember that you chose money over doing what's right. And when Frank stops coming in here because he's too embarrassed to show his face, remember that you lost the best customer this place ever had." She handed him the apron and walked out of the office, her head held high even though her heart was breaking. The minute hand on the old clock above Murphy's Diner cash register moved with painful slowness. Mia had been gone for exactly 43 minutes, and Frank Kowalski sat in his corner booth staring at his untouched coffee, watching it grow cold. Rex lay beside him, but even the old dog seemed restless, occasionally lifting his head to look toward the door as if expecting Mia to walk back through it at any moment. Frank had tried to eat his toast, but each bite tasted like cardboard. His hands were shaking more than usual, and it wasn't just from age. In 30 years of police work, he had seen plenty of injustice, but watching a young woman lose her job for defending him and Rex had hit him harder than he expected. The other customers in the diner were trying to act normal, but Frank could feel them stealing glances at his table. Mrs. Patterson had walked over twice to check on him, patting his shoulder and telling him how sorry she was about what happened. Joe, the construction worker, had stopped by his table before leaving for his job site, shaking Frank's hand and muttering something about how the world was going to hell when good people got punished for doing right. But their kindness only made Frank feel worse. A young woman had sacrificed her job for him, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. Tommy had tried to approach the table once, probably to apologize or explain, but Frank had given him one look that made the manager turn around and walk away. Frank didn't trust himself to speak to Tommy right now, not when his blood pressure was up and his old police instincts were telling him to say things that wouldn't help anybody. After finishing his coffee, Frank pulled out his cell phone. The numbers were small and his fingers weren't as steady as they used to be, but he managed to dial the number he knew by heart. "City Police Department," came the familiar voice of Betty, the dispatcher who had been working the phone since before Frank retired. "Betty, it's Frank Kowalski. Is Chief Anderson available?" "Frank, how are you doing?" "Hold on. Let me check if he's in his office." Frank waited, listening to the hold music while Rex rested his head on Frank's leg. Through the diner windows, he could see normal people going about their normal Tuesday morning routines. People heading to work, grabbing coffee, Living there lives without knowing that sometimes doing the right thing could cost you everything. Frank? Chief Anderson's voice came through the phone, warm and concerned. What's going on? Betty said you sounded upset. Frank took a deep breath and told him everything. About the businessman in the expensive suit, about his threats and demands. About Mia standing up for them when no one else would. About Tommy firing the best employee the diner had because she wouldn't let an old man and his dog be treated like garbage. Chief Anderson listened without interrupting, which had always been one of his best qualities as both an officer and a leader. When Frank finished talking, there was silence on the other end of the line for several long seconds. Are you still at the diner? The chief finally asked. Yeah, I'm still here. Don't really know where else to go. Stay put. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead, and Frank stared at his phone, wondering what Chief Anderson was planning. They had worked together for years before Frank retired, and he knew that tone of voice. It was the same tone the chief used when someone had crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. Frank tried to finish his toast while he waited, but his stomach was still in knots. Rex seemed to sense his distress because the old dog moved closer, pressing his warm body against Frank's leg in the way he always did when he knew his partner needed comfort. Other customers came and went during those 15 minutes. The breakfast crowd was thinning out, replaced by people grabbing late morning coffee and early lunch. But Frank barely noticed them. He kept checking the clock, watching the minutes tick by and wondering what was going to happen next. At exactly 11:15, the bell above the diner door chimed, and Frank looked up to see a sight that made several customers stop mid-conversation. Chief Anderson walked through the door in full uniform, his badge gleaming under the diner's fluorescent lights. He was a big man, probably 6'3", with broad shoulders and the kind of presence that commanded attention even when he wasn't trying. His expression was serious, the kind of look that made people automatically wonder if they had done something wrong. Behind him came Officer Davis, also in uniform, followed by Officer Martinez. Then came two more officers Frank recognized from his days on the force. Within 30 seconds, 5 police officers were standing inside Murphy's diner, and every conversation in the place had stopped completely. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Coffee cups stopped moving. Even the cook in the back seemed to have stopped whatever he was doing, because the usual sizzling and clattering sounds from the kitchen went quiet. Tommy emerged from behind the counter, his face pale as a sheet. Frank could practically see the man's mind racing, trying to figure out if someone had called in a robbery, or if there was some kind of emergency, or if this had something to do with the incident earlier. Chief Anderson's eyes swept the diner until they found Frank's table. He nodded once, a small gesture that said everything Frank needed to know. Then his gaze moved to Tommy, and Frank saw the manager actually take a step backward. "Are you the manager of this establishment?" Chief Anderson asked, his voice carrying easily across the silent diner. Yes, sir," Tommy stammered. "I'm Tommy Walsh. Is there some kind of problem, officer?" "Chief," Anderson corrected. "Chief Anderson. And yes, there is a problem. I need to speak with you privately." Tommy's hands were visibly shaking now. Of course, we can go to my office. Is this about the health department complaint? Because I want you to know that we follow all regulations here and— My office will be fine," Chief Anderson interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Tommy led the way toward the back office, Frank noticed that Officer Davis and Officer Martinez had positioned themselves near the front door, not blocking it exactly, but definitely making their presence known. The other 2 officers took seats at different tables, their uniforms and equipment making them impossible to ignore. The atmosphere in the diner had completely changed. What had been a comfortable neighborhood restaurant 15 minutes ago now felt like a courtroom where judgment was about to be passed. Frank could hear hushed whispers from other tables, people speculating about what was happening and whether it had anything to do with the incident earlier. Mrs. Patterson caught Frank's eye from across the room and gave him a knowing look. She had been around long enough to recognize justice when she saw it coming. Through the thin walls of Tommy's office, Frank could hear voices, though he couldn't make out the words. Chief Anderson's voice was steady and authoritative, while Tommy's responses were higher-pitched and more frequent, like a man trying to talk his way out of trouble. Rex lifted his head and looked toward the office. His ears perked up in that alert way that meant he was reading the situation. Even in retirement, the old dog could sense when something important was happening. The conversation in the office went on for about 10 minutes, though it felt like an hour to everyone in the dining room. When the office door finally opened, Tommy emerged looking like he had seen a ghost. His face was white, his hands were shaking, and there were actual beads of sweat on his forehead. Chief Anderson followed him out, his expression unchanged, but his eyes scanning the diner like he was taking inventory of everything and everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice easily reaching every corner of the restaurant, "I apologize for the interruption to your morning. We'll be concluding our business here shortly." Then he looked directly at Frank and nodded toward the co-chaucer. "Frank, could I have a word with you outside?" Frank stood up slowly, his joints protesting after sitting in the booth for so long. Rex automatically rose beside him, ready to follow wherever his partner needed to go. As they walked toward the door, Frank could feel every eye in the place following them. Whatever Chief Anderson had planned, it was clear that the morning's drama wasn't over yet. The bell chimed behind them as they stepped out into the morning air, leaving behind a diner full of people who knew they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. The morning air outside Murphy's diner felt cool against Frank's face as Chief Anderson closed the door behind them. Rex immediately took his position beside Frank's leg, alert but calm, the way he had been trained to be during important conversations. "Frank," Chief Anderson said, his voice quieter now that they were away from the crowd inside, "I want you to know that what happened in there this morning was completely unacceptable. Not just the discrimination against you and Rex, but the way that young woman was treated for standing up for what's right." Frank nodded, feeling a tightness in his chest. "Chief, Mia didn't deserve to lose her job. She was just doing what any decent person should do." "I know," Anderson replied. "And that's exactly why I made some phone calls on my way over here. Tell me, what do you know about Mia's background? Has she ever mentioned wanting to work in public service?" Frank thought for a moment. "She's mentioned college a few times. Something about criminal justice courses, I think. Said she was taking night classes but had to stop because of the cost." Chief Anderson smiled for the first time since arriving at the diner. "Perfect, because I have a proposition for her if she's interested." Before Frank could ask what kind of proposition, one of the officers inside the diner opened the door and stepped outside. "Chief," Officer Davis said, "the young woman is here. She just pulled into the parking lot." Frank turned to see Mia's beat-up Honda Civic pulling into a space near the front entrance. Through the windshield, he could see her looking confused at all the police cars, probably wondering if something terrible had happened at the diner. "Good timing," Chief Anderson said. "Frank, why don't you go talk to her? Bring her inside. I think she needs to hear what I have to say." Frank walked over to Mia's car as she was getting out, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. "Frank, what's going on?" she asked immediately. "Are you okay? Is Rex okay? Why are there so many police cars here?" "We're fine, sweetheart," Frank said gently. "But I think you need to come inside and hear what Chief Anderson has to say." Mia shook her head. "I can't go back in there, Frank. Tommy fired me. I'm not even supposed to be here." "Trust me," Frank said, offering her his arm the way his father had taught him to do for ladies when he was young. "You need to hear this." Something in Frank's voice must have convinced her because after a moment's hesitation, she took his arm and walked with him toward the diner entrance. Rex followed beside them, creating a small procession that felt somehow significant. When they walked back through the front door, every head in the diner turned to look at them. The police officers were still positioned throughout the restaurant, and Tommy was standing behind the counter looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Chief Anderson was waiting in the middle of the dining room, his presence commanding everyone's attention without him having to say a word. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily throughout the space, "I want to address what happened here this morning, because it affects not just the people directly involved, but this entire community." The silence was complete. Even the coffee machine seemed to have stopped its usual gurgling sounds. This morning, a retired police officer and his service dog were discriminated against by another customer. And when an employee of this establishment stood up for their rights under federal law, she was terminated from her job. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson was nodding vigorously, while Joe the construction worker was shaking his head in disgust. What many of you might not know, Chief Anderson continued, is that Frank Kowalski and his partner Rex served this community with distinction for 15 years. They were responsible for finding 12 missing children, removing millions of dollars worth of illegal drugs from our streets, and keeping countless families safe. Frank felt his cheeks burning with embarrassment, but Rex seemed to sense the attention and sat up a little straighter, his chest puffed out with old pride. And this young woman, Anderson said, gesturing toward Mia, showed the kind of moral courage that we need more of in this world. She stood up for what was right, even when it cost her personally. Mia was staring at the chief with wide eyes, clearly having no idea where this was going. Now, Anderson continued, Mr. Walsh here has explained to me that he was under pressure from a customer who was making threats against his business. I understand that running a small business is difficult, and that one bad review can cause real financial harm. Tommy nodded eagerly, hope flickering in his eyes. However, Anderson's voice got harder. Federal law doesn't allow for exceptions based on business concerns. The Americans with Disabilities Act is clear about the rights of service dog handlers, and discriminating against someone because of their disability is a serious violation. The hope in Tommy's eyes started to fade. I've explained to Mr. Walsh that the police department will be filing a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding this incident. We'll also be recommending that the city review Murphy's Diner's business license to ensure full compliance with disability access laws. Tommy went even paler if that was possible. But, Anderson said, his tone shifting slightly, I believe in second chances, especially when people are willing to make things right. He turned to look at Mia directly. Miss Chen, I understand you were studying criminal justice before financial constraints forced you to leave school? Mia nodded, still looking confused about why a police chief would know anything about her education. The police department has been looking for someone to work in our community outreach program, someone who understands what it means to stand up for people who can't always stand up for themselves, someone who knows how to treat all members of our community with respect and dignity. The realization of what he was suggesting hit Mia like a lightning bolt. The position comes with full benefits, including tuition assistance for employees who want to continue their education. The starting salary is $38,000 a year, with opportunities for advancement based on performance and additional training. Mia's mouth fell open. That was almost twice what she had been making at the diner. If you're interested, Anderson continued, you could start next Monday. We'd put you through a brief training program, and then you'd be working with schools, community centers, and local businesses to help build better relationships between the police and the people we serve. The entire diner was silent, waiting for Mia's response. Frank found himself holding his breath. Yes, Mia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'm very interested. The diner erupted in applause. Mrs. Patterson was clapping, so hard her bracelets were jingling. Joe let out a whistle that probably violated several noise ordinances. Even some of the police officers were smiling and clapping. Chief Anderson held up his hand for quiet. There's one more thing, he said. Mr. Walsh, I believe you have something to say to Miss Chen? All eyes turned to Tommy, who looked like he was about to be sick. He cleared his throat several times before managing to speak. Mia, he said, his voice cracking, I owe you an apology. What I did this morning was wrong. You were standing up for what was right, and instead of supporting you, I let fear make my decisions for me. I'm sorry. Mia looked at him for a long moment. Frank could see her weighing her response, deciding whether to be gracious or to let Tommy have it with both barrels. Thank you, Tommy, she said finally. I accept your apology. Chief Anderson nodded approvingly. Mr. Walsh, I hope this experience has been educational. The department will be checking in periodically to ensure that all customers are being treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. Tommy nodded vigorously. Yes, sir, absolutely, sir. As the police officers began to file out of the diner, Chief Anderson stopped at Frank's table one more time. "Frank," he said, "thank you for calling this in. It's officers like you, even retired ones, who help us remember why we do this job." He turned to Rex and actually bent down to pat the old dog's head. "And thank you, Rex, for your years of service." Rex's tail wagged for the first time all morning. After the police left, the diner slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation. But there was an energy in the air that hadn't been there before. People were talking animatedly about what they had witnessed, about standing up for what's right, about second chances and justice. Frank ordered another cup of coffee, and this time when Mia brought it to his table, she was wearing civilian clothes instead of the diner uniform. "So," Frank said, raising his coffee cup, "here's to new beginnings." Mia smiled, the first genuine smile Frank had seen from her all day. "Here's to doing what's right, even when it's hard." They clinked his coffee cup against her empty water. Glass and Rex's tail thumped against the floor in approval. Outside, the world continued its normal Tuesday morning routine, but inside Murphy's diner, three friends sat together knowing that sometimes, if you're brave enough to stand up for what's right, the universe has a way of making things work out exactly as they should.